Hello there everybody and welcome to this channel. My name is Savvy from SAanatomy.com, and for today's video we're going to be working on a giraffe in Blender. So get your reference images ready, get your drawing pad, and let's get started. So for the start of this model, just like all the other sculpts that we worked on in Blender, we're going to start this off by modeling the giraffe. You can get your reference images from anywhere as long as you have your front view and your side view and they're easily readable. You can also have your third quarter view just in case you want some proper references. And then we're going to move on with the proper topology. We have to make sure that we have good enough topology. It doesn't have to be perfect, just like the T-Rex that we worked on before in the other video. We just have to make sure that the topology is good enough for us to sculpt easier. And also it helps with remeshing. And in case you want to animate the model at a later stage, then the topology will help with that. So instead of you manually retopologizing and shrink wrapping over the high res, we're just going to use the low res, and then we're going to apply a multi-resolution modifier and start going up in resolution and sculpting with that. What I wanted to do for this model was make sure that certain areas of the model had proper edge flow, such as the mouth. I knew that I will be able to sculpt over these proper topologies when we go into the sculpting phase. It helps and it makes it a lot easier. If the edge flow just follows along, it follows the right path, then it makes it easier for you to get some really nice details here and there. You can also just mess around with the topology whenever you like, and then you can go in and sculpt later on, unless you're going to be remeshing the entire sculpt or the entire model. Blender's remesher just kind of like makes everything into quads, unless you have new remesher add-ons or you're using ZBrush to remesh that tries to get proper edge flows depending on your sculpt or your meshes forms or topology or the way certain forms are shaped. So what I wanted to do was just get proper edge flow here and there for the eye as well, the mouth, some parts of the hooves and the ears. For the neck, I recommend actually blocking out some muscle groups. I did find them a little challenging to sculpt over them because the neck was so stretched out, so the sculpt was the mesh around the neck was just kind of crumbling a little bit. So I suggest modeling out some muscle groups such as the brachiocephalicus or the sternomandibularis. So it's a lot easier for you to actually sculpt them out later on. The overall size of the giraffe's body is fairly small, so if you can look on the side here, you don't need a lot of edge loops. You just need enough that can support the amount of details that we're going to put in once we start sculpting. For the legs, all I did was just extrude down. I selected an edge loop and just extrude it down. You can also do the same with just a cylinder with a small edge count. So you can add a cylinder and then you can just extrude upwards or downwards depending on where you start. And then you can also do the same with the hooves. You can connect it to the cylinder as well, and then you could just model out the hooves easily. You could also cut out a small part of the hooves, copy it, and then place it for the back hooves. Remember, working this way just works for me. Creating a model, working on the topology first before sculpting. This is just my method. This is how I start most of my sculpts or most of my models. This is because in case I want to use it for a different thing in the future, in case I want to animate it or I want to pose it in different ways or whatever, it's much easier to do that if I have something I know that has good topology or is at least optimized. You can skip this if you feel like you don't need to pose it or animate it or rig it in the future. You can totally just start off with blocking out and then you can start sculpting, so you can just skip over to the sculpting phase. But if you do decide to work on the topology, then I suggest that you spend some time working on the model yourself. Whatever works for you, whatever you feel is right, and how, well, obviously there are certain guidelines and there are certain things you're supposed to do in a specific way. Certain topology, you can't just go with your gut feeling. You actually have to make sure that it works and it's functional and it's actually proper. The edge flow works nicely. And if you want a low res model or something like that, you also have to make sure that your vert count or your poly count is well, or it's good, and it's not extreme. Like you can't have a you can't expect to use a model and you think that it's low res, but it has like a poly count of 3000 or something like that, especially for this kind of model. You can do with about 1000 or at least 700 vertices. So if you are going to work on the topology, then I do suggest just spending some time. You can watch the video, you can pause it, and you can spend some time on the topology or do some research and find out how to optimize your models and all that, and then you can move on to sculpting. So coming into the sculpting phase, the body can be easily blocked out because of its size. It's fairly small, so there's not a lot of detail that you have to focus on. Well, there is detail, but most of the muscle groups just fall in together really nicely. It's really tight in there. Then I mainly focused on the front of the sculpt. This was because even when I was looking at the reference images, I knew that I would probably have some issues with the neck. And I knew that I wanted to just block out some parts around it, some muscle groups around it first, and then I can move on to the rest of the body and then come back for the neck. So coming into the neck, I wanted to block out just a few muscle groups and then leave it and then come back at a later stage. So I blocked out the brachiocephalicus and then moved on to the omotransversalis. So I blocked out all other muscle groups, just very small. I didn't go into detail, and then I left it for a while and sculpted the rest of the body, the arms, the legs, the hooves, and then some parts of the tail, and moved into the head as well, and then just came back at a later stage for the neck. Now coming into the arms, I realized something very interesting for me. It might be different for when you're working on it, but when I was finished with the trapezius, I found it really easy to sculpt in the following muscle groups, such as the deltoids and going into the triceps. And then coming into the extensors, I wanted to put in a little more detail as well, like adding in the bone and showing how everything connects. Not too detailed, but I just wanted to get those forms out as well. By the way, if you're struggling to work on the extensors or some parts of the legs because of how thin they are, then you can either use inflate. Another thing that you could do is on the brush that you're using, you can also go to your brush settings at the top there and then check front faces only. So when working on the abdominal obliques or any other muscle groups, you can also use the crease brush, but I tend to use the clay brush. You'll also notice in ZBrush I use the clay buildup. This is because as it's adding volume, it flattens the surface, and I just think that that's a really nice detail. And I'm not saying that I don't use the crease brush at all. You can see right over here right now, I am going back with the crease brush just to get those details, those like nice pinches in between. What you can also do in Blender is also use the pinch brush to make the muscle connections kind of feel tight as well. So there are many things that you could do with all these kind of brushes. You're not limited to just your standard, your clay, and your crease. You can experiment and you can work with all kinds of brushes. You can also create your own kind of brush alphas, and you can have your custom brushes as well. So there's a lot to do, but usually I use the clay brush. One thing that you can do, or one thing that you have to realize is whilst we're working on these sculpts, you are free to experiment as much as you can with certain brushes, just following these guidelines and all that, just watching these videos. And if you find anything helpful, then that's great. So what you can do, this neat little trick that I found out when working on the quadriceps a while back, you can come in with your crease brush or your draw sharp in Blender, and then you can actually just outline where the groups or the muscles that you want to work on. So say for example you want to work on the biceps femoris, then you can outline those kind of parts, and then you can come in with your inflate brush, and your inflate won't really change much on the detail that you put in with the crease brush, so like your dips or the indents or anything like that. So it'll inflate the sides that are extruding, so it'll only draw those ones out. So that's pretty interesting. So what I tend to do is I'll just come in with my crease brush, and then with a different kind of brush I'll just sculpt around those kind of details, also trying to skip ahead and draw in the lines that you'll normally see on muscles. So like those multiple lines going in a specific or a certain direction. That's what I use. That's what I tend to do. So what you can do is just experiment, and whatever works for you, then that's great. When it comes to the head of the giraffe, I didn't have many references. You have to make sure that you have a lot of references of everything when you're working on this, but I worked on the knowledge that I had already knew. So I already had some idea or ideas on how certain muscle groups were supposed to look, and I had some references, but I just didn't have the perfect ones that I was looking for. That's one thing you need to do. Just spend some time doing as much research, and also gathering reference images. You need to have like a bunch of images, like a bunch of reference images, videos, all those kinds of stuff. If you can go to a zoo and all that and look at a giraffe and see how it moves and all that, then that's really helpful as well. You do anything you can, just as long as at the end of it you kind of grasp, or you kind of now understand how certain things work. So for the head, I was just working off of knowledge that I already had, and ideas of how the head was supposed to look. I would say that in some cases, although it's much easier to just fill in the gaps with knowledge that you have, say for example, your reference images isn't showing like the belly of the animal that you're working on. If you already know how the belly looks, then that's fine. But if you're just flowing just with ideas, you just have like some concepts in your head, then I suggest that you just do a whole lot of research and find these reference images that will help you, because sometimes you assume that the anatomy is supposed to flow in this way and all that, and sometimes you might be right, sometimes you could be completely wrong. So as you can see here for the face, the sculpting is going really well. This is because the topology is actually quite good. The topology doesn't really do much. It's just if it's good topology, if the mesh isn't fighting with you, then everything works well and everything works perfectly. So one way of, if for example you're having issues with your mesh, you're trying to sculpt over certain things and it's not really coming out nicely, one way of fixing that is you can go up in resolution, or you can use dyno topology. Just make sure to remesh at the end of it, because you won't really have controlled edge flows anymore with dyno topology. So you can do the same in ZBrush whenever you're having problems. Say for example in Blender, if you're working on a deer and you want to bring the antlers of the deer outwards, or you want to extrude things for example, but you're pulling it with the move brush or the snake brush, then you would need either the dyno topology, or you just need to remesh in order to form new topology around the extruded parts. Or even if you're not extruding things at all, if your mesh just isn't working with you, you can just hit remesh a couple of times and it should be fine afterwards. So right now, as you can see, I just finished the neck. I went back and I put in those details that I said I was gonna come back to, and now I'm just refining things. So at this point everything is done, and I hope that you learned something whilst you were watching these videos. And if you want to learn more, just keep on watching our videos, and with that I hope to see you in the next one.